Ever wonder how a bunch of scrappy colonists beat the most powerful army in the world? It wasn't just big battles like Saratoga or Yorktown. The real secret weapon, the one that truly broke the British will to fight, was something else entirely. It was a new kind of war, fought in the swamps, forests, and backwoods of America. This is the story of how guerrilla warfare, a hellish, unseen conflict, shattered Britain's iron grip. Imagine you're a British soldier, a redcoat. You're trained for open field battles, lining up in neat rows, firing in volleys. You're the best of the best. But here, in America, the rules are different. The enemy doesn't line up. They don't wear uniforms. They're farmers by day and fighters by night. They strike from the shadows and vanish into the trees before you can even raise your musket. This was the nightmare that awaited the British Army, a nightmare they called Redcoat Reckoning. To understand why this happened, we need to look at the British strategy. They thought they could win by capturing major cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. Take the cities, they believed, and the rebellion would collapse. And at first, it seemed to be working. They had more troops, better equipment, and a powerful navy. On paper, it was a total mismatch. But the American continent is vast. Holding a few cities meant nothing when the countryside, the heart of the rebellion, remained unconquered and defiant. The British controlled the ground they stood on, and not much else. Every supply convoy that left the safety of a city was a target. Every patrol was an ambush waiting to happen. The Redcoats were an army of occupation in a land that refused to be occupied. This is where the legends of guerrilla warfare were born. Men like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, became symbols of this new kind of fighting. Marion and his small band of militiamen operated out of the swampy wilderness of South Carolina. They knew the terrain like the back of their hands, the hidden paths, the murky waterways, the dense thickets. For the British, it was an alien, terrifying landscape. For Marion's men, it was home, and it was their greatest weapon. They would emerge from the mist to strike a British supply line, capturing wagons full of food, ammunition, and payroll. Then, just as quickly, they would melt back into the swamp, leaving the British confused and frustrated. Chasing the Swamp Fox was a fool's errand. His tactics were simple but brutally effective. Hit hard, hit fast, and disappear. He never engaged in a pitched battle he couldn't win. He bled the British army slowly, one small cut at a time. These tactics drove the British commander in the south, Lord Cornwallis, absolutely mad. He famously complained, "But as for this old fox, the devil himself could not catch him." Cornwallis had to divert thousands of his precious regular troops to hunt down Marion and other militia leaders. This was exactly what the Americans wanted. Every soldier chasing ghosts in the swamp was one less soldier available for the main British army. And it wasn't just Francis Marion. All across the colonies, similar stories were playing out. In the north, figures like Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys in Vermont used their knowledge of the rugged landscape to harass British forces. In the western frontier, men like George Rogers Clark led daring raids that secured vast territories for the American cause. These weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. They were frontiersmen, farmers, and artisans, united by a fierce desire for independence. What made this so effective? First, it was a war of attrition. The British Empire was fighting a global conflict. They had enemies in Europe and colonies to protect around the world. The war in America was expensive, and every lost wagon, every captured musket, every soldier picked off by a sniper added to the cost. The constant nagging pressure of guerrilla attacks drained British resources and morale. Second, it was psychological warfare. The constant threat of ambush took a heavy toll on the British soldiers. They couldn't relax. They couldn't feel safe. The woods themselves seemed hostile. This constant fear and uncertainty wore them down far more than any single battle could. A letter from a British officer described it perfectly. "We are in a country where every bush may conceal an enemy." The psychological strain was immense. Third, the guerrillas had the support of the local population. This was crucial. Civilians provided food, shelter, and most importantly, intelligence. A farmer might see a British patrol on the move and send a rider to warn the local militia. A woman running a tavern might overhear the plans of British officers and pass that information along. The rebels were part of the community, while the British were always outsiders, strangers in a hostile land. This network of civilian support acted as the eyes and ears of the rebellion, making it impossible for the British to achieve any element of surprise. Of course, the British tried to fight back. They employed their own loyalist militias and tried to adopt similar tactics. They sent out ruthless commanders like Banastra Tarleton, known for his brutal, take-no-prisoners approach. But these methods often backfired spectacularly. Tarleton's cruelty, for instance, only served to enrage the local population, driving more and more neutral or wavering colonists into the arms of the rebellion. For every farmhouse he burned, 10 more men picked up a rifle, determined to get revenge. The British attempt to terrorize the population into submission only strengthened its resolve. This brutal cycle of attack and reprisal turned the Southern Campaign, in particular, into a bloody civil war. But it was a war the British couldn't win. They were trying to put out 1,000 small fires at once, and they simply didn't have the manpower or the local knowledge to do it. So how did this all lead to the end of the war? The guerrilla campaigns perfectly complemented the strategy of the main Continental Army, led by George Washington. While Washington's army kept the main British forces tied up, the militias and partisans were gnawing at the edges, disrupting their supply lines and communications. The climax came at Yorktown. Lord Cornwallis, exhausted and frustrated after months of being hounded by guerrillas across the Carolinas, retreated to the Virginia coast, hoping to be resupplied or evacuated by the Royal Navy. But it was a trap. The French Navy, America's crucial ally, blockaded the coast, cutting off his escape. Meanwhile, Washington's Continental Army and their French allies marched south and surrounded him on land. Cornwallis was trapped, and it was a trap that the guerrilla fighters had helped to set. Their relentless campaign had pushed him into this vulnerable position. Without the constant pressure from men like Francis Marion, Cornwallis might never have made the fatal decision to march to Yorktown. His surrender there in 1781 effectively ended the war. When the news reached London, a member of Parliament famously said, "Oh God, it is all over." And it was. The political will in Britain to continue the expensive, bloody and seemingly unwinnable war in America finally collapsed. They had won many of the major battles, but they had lost the war. They lost it in the swamps of South Carolina, in the forests of New York, and in the hearts and minds of the American people. The American Revolution teaches us a powerful lesson. War isn't just about armies and battles. It's about will, strategy, and popular support. The scrappy American colonists, using the land itself as a weapon and fighting a war on their own terms, proved that a determined people can overcome even the greatest of military powers. The Redcoat Reckoning wasn't just a military defeat for Britain. It was the birth of a new nation, forged in the fires of a revolutionary new way of fighting. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this piece of history as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories you might not have learned in school. Let me know in the comments which part of this guerrilla war you found most interesting. See you in the next video.